Hello, guys. And today we are going to discuss one more aspect of promise, that is promise.all. So the question is, why do we need promise.all? So promise.all essentially what it does is that it makes the entire group of promise successful only when all the promises are successful. For example, if I'm making a request to A and B, then the operation is successful if both A and B are successful. Let us say we have two tasks, A and B. So A and B are two tasks, and if A and B both are successful, then only the promise is considered successful. So if A and B both are successful, then the promise is successful. So let's take this with a simple example. This is my first function, which is get random number 1. And there is another function, random number 1. And we have another function that also generates a random number with the name get random number 2. You can see these functions on the right side. So this is my get random number 1, and this is my get random number 2. Now, if both these functions return a promise and both the promises are resolved, then it is successful. So now each of these functions is going to return a promise. Say the first one is promise 1. Promise 1. And the second one is going to be promise 2. If both these promises are resolved, then that means that it is successful, and for this same purpose we use promise.all function, which is used to ensure that no matter how many asynchronous tasks we are doing, if all are successful, then only the job is said to be successful. Let us say if you want to get a user name and you also want to get user email, and both these are separate requests to the server. In that case, if both these requests are successful, that means you are able to get the username, also the email, then only the job is said to be successful. If even one of them fails, then the job is said to be failed. So let us now try to do this with an example. Now let us try to write the code for the same. So this is the function get random number 1, and this function returns a random number. I have get random number 2 that also returns a random number, but after some amount of time. So that way we are able to make both these functions asynchronous, which means they are taking time. Now let's understand how we use promise.all. So the syntax is promise.all. Now keep in mind, this is the same constructor promise by which we create the promise object, which means all is a static function on the promise constructor function. We can also say class for our simplicity. So I would say that the all is a static function present on the promise class. Now let us see how it works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first create two promise. So let promise 1 equal to get random number 1, which returns a random number. Now let promise 2 equal to get random number 2. This also generates a random number. Just a small difference that the first function get random number 1 generates a random number after 6 seconds. The get random number 2 generates a random number after 4 seconds. So we have got two promises. Now to use promise.all, we have to use promise class.all, and inside that we have to provide both these promises as an array. So I'm going to write promise 1, which is returned from the first function, promise 2, which is the second promise object. Now I'm going to use promise.all, and then after that I'm going to use then again, because this promise.all also returns a promise. Yes, this promise.all also returns a promise, but that is a combination of both these promises. And in the then I can do the regular thing, function. Here I can say result success, which means the result, what happens when the result is successful. And I'm going to just do a console.log result success. That is all. Now keep in mind, we can also use catch here, .catch, and in the catch I can write here error, and let us say just write error. We can give this variable any name, and let us try to print the error. So first we are going to make it simple. We are going to ensure that both the promises are resolved. So let us try to now run this piece of code and see what is the output. Open my console and let us see what is the output. All right. So what do we see here? We see that we are getting a success message, and have a look at it. This is coming on line number 34. Line number 34, which means it is successful. Now keep in mind, the variable that is returned in this particular success function returns me an array, because keep in mind there are two promises, which means if both the promises are successful, we are going to get two results which are in the form of an array. I can also add third promise here, and if there is a third promise, then we will get three values in the array, each value corresponding to the successful value of the promise. You can look at here 9 and 6, correct? And there is a console message which I have kept in the function just for clarity purpose. So these two console messages correspond to these messages here, which you can see. All right, so that is how we are able to use promise.all, used when we want to make sure that if all the requests or all the promises are successful, then only we do something. If even one of them fails, then this entire promise fails. So now let us try to do one more thing where I'm going to fail one of the promises. So let us try to do that. I'm going to put here reject in the first promise instead of resolve, which means the first promise fails. Let us now try to do it again and see what is the output. So now again, 4 seconds, 6 seconds, and finally we get 0, which is on line number 36. 37. Line number 37, which is here, which means the catch function is executing even if one of the promises fails. And what is this 0? This 0 is actually, you can see this value, which is generated in the failed promise here. So that is how we can, do these type of operations where we want to make sure that both the promise or whatever the number of operations we are doing, if all are successful, then only the entire operation is successful, or then only we do something to maybe display a message to the user or continue the execution of the program. Let us now try to make it even more simpler. So what I will do is here, I'm going to write a message that the group of promises are successful and result equal to, and display the result here. That is all. And if it is failing, I'm going to display the message. One or more promises failed and result equal to. So mind you, what is this error? If we want to make more clarity, we can write error data, because this error data is actually the result or the message that we send when the promise fails. For example, let us say this promise is failing. So instead of reject sending the random number, I'm just going to say unable to generate random number. So this is going to be my error message. Let's write here error equal to. Now, let us again try to run this piece of code and see what is the output. So again, I'm trying to run this piece of code. And this time again, what happens? The promise fails and we will go in the catch, and one or more promises failed and error equal to unable to generate random number, which is the same error that we sent here, right? That is all. Thank you very much, guys.